Welcome back to episode number 15 of Destination Unknown. I find myself in San Francisco, California, with longtime bookseller Leo Buckley and musician Leo Buckley. So we have a great story to tell. We have a long book-selling story to tell. And so we're going to start with just a brief introduction from Leo, and he'll tell us a little bit about where he got his start from. And then we're going to go deep, deep, deep into the book world. So Leo, welcome to
Yeah,
Destination Unknown. I
thank
know
you.
I know you started young, so let's start there.
Yeah, so basically my mom's mom owned a bookstore in Salinas for a short while that was mostly used books. And well, my mom was the one who really got me into literature, taking us to the library all the day, all the time. So, but both her parents, like, yeah, my grandmother ran a bookstore for a short little while in Salinas, and then her father actually in his basement actually had a big library of books that I would always take stuff from when I'd stay there. And then yeah, my dad's dad had a pretty good collection of some old time books. And then so yeah, I'd always go to the library on weekends and stuff like that. And I was a big voracious reader. And then about my junior year in high school, I wound up getting hired at this place in Carmel called the Thunderbird, and that I worked there from 2000 and or sorry, 1998 to 1999 till I
You got to
graduated
age
high
yourself,
school.
Leo. You got to age
Yeah,
yourself on this show.
yeah. From 1998 to 1999, and that was my start. Basically, yeah, in the book selling industry was I'd work in the back with the receiving crew when I'd put the little security things into the books and put the labels on the back. And usually I was listening to like the classic rock station while I was doing this. So, and, but they had it was a really good crew of booksellers. And it was an interesting time. Let's see, there was a bookstore that had a cafe. They had their own sectioned off new age psychology spiritual section, which
Mhm.
and the one of the women who had worked there was Deepak Chopra's personal chef.
Okay.
So, and it was, yeah, it was a really good crew of booksellers. I remember we all went to see The Phantom Menace when it came out. And the owner actually went to my high school graduation, which was really, yeah, I was just really shocked for all that kind of support. So it was sort of a little bit tough when I left there because it was such a nice crew of people. And like, yeah, it was also the time when the first Harry Potter book came out, and it's sort of one of the reasons I never read Harry Potter because this wonderful bookseller loved it and put it out early. But that's when I first learned about lay down embargo dates, and so we were threatened with a lawsuit. So I just was like, I can't believe they would do this to this guy Dale. So I never touched those books. And still I was glad I feel like justified over the years of what
Yeah.
terrible person J.K. Rowling is now. So after that, I moved up. 1999 is when I graduated high school, and I moved up to San Francisco to go to USF, and it was known as CCAC at the time, California College of Arts and Crafts. But they dropped the crafts part because it was at a time that it wasn't taken as
Right.
seriously. So now it's known as CCA, which is still have gripes about that. But I was looking for work in like late 1999, and I stumbled upon a place on Haight Street called Great Expectations Bookstore, and I thought it was a bookstore, but it was more some used books and part of the T-shirt operation, which the guy who owned it had a store called Haight Ashbury T-shirts on the corner. So I was mostly dealing with T-shirts and folding T-shirts instead of dealing with actual books, except for we'd sell a few here and there.
Did they
Yeah.
specialize in any sort of book back then?
No, it was just used books. The one book I got from there was a Soundgarden "Louder Than Love"
Okay.
tab book, which I
Mhm.
still have,
Yeah.
so which will still serve me at some point in the future when I
Right.
do a
Yeah.
Soundgarden cover band.
But I mean that area is just so ripe with literature and books and art.
They had some stuff dealing with the hippie stuff, but it was just they didn't really try to compete in the bookseller market.
Mhm.
There actually is a long-standing bookstore down the street called the Booksmith,
Mhm.
and they're still standing. But he never tried to really compete in that market. He was making too much money off of t-shirts, so he wound up doing that. So unfortunately, I got fired from there for getting caught doing what everybody on Haight Ashbury does, which is smoke weed. In 2001, I was living out in the Presidio, and that's where I found the company I've been working for the last 23 years, called Books Inc.
Right.
Because they had a store in Laurel Village, and I applied there, and they hired me, and I basically have done everything short of managing for that company. In terms of Laurel Village, I was like the young person on staff. I worked with like these a bunch of old women. So and I did the magazines. I was hired by a guy called his name is Calvin Crosby. He ran the NCIBA, which became the California Booksellers
Right.
Association now, because it combined both Northern California and Southern California. And now he runs the King's English Bookshop in Utah. So he's all like, yeah, he's basically been sort of like always sort of been a mentor, even though like
Right.
I haven't crossed paths with him that much. I
And the
worked with,
and
yeah,
the whole time though, you've been doing music as well, correct?
yes. While I was in, I'd always been doing music since I was like, piano was my first instrument, but I'd always been like in school bands, or did the school band from fifth grade through
Mhm.
high school. And then I figured I'd be like a lot of the British rock guys where they went to art school and they all formed bands.
Now it's all coming together.
Yeah, so I definitely found that was my foot in the door in terms of doing bands was in art school. My first band started there, and I still play music with two other people. Two other
Mhm.
people. One of them is actually the bass player in Acid King now. So,
Okay.
and then my drummer in that band, he does. Yeah, his bands have been blowing up, and like, yeah, that's how I got my foot in the Bay Area music, rock, and metal scene was that band, and that's how I made all the connections uh, through music in the rock scene. I've met like a lot of my favorite musicians and done like three U.S. tours, or two full U.S. tours, and then a bunch of longer tours and stuff like that. So I will never stop doing that. So, and part of the reason I've been a
You live
bookseller,
in people's dreams. You're in the music
yeah,
business and you're in the bookstore business.
yes. The only thing is not making money, but it's the only common denominator.
Well,
But yeah.
what I like about this is, you've been with Books Inc. going on a quarter of a century now.
Mhm.
So you've also seen you've seen what customers want, what they desire, what type of books
Yes.
they like. You got a great handle on that. But
Mhm.
you've also seen the changes in the book business.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I
Yes.
would say, yeah, over the last quarter of a century that I've been in the book business as well, I've seen
Mhm.
such monumental and groundbreaking changes that I think we should dive there a little bit. So
Yeah.
let's start first. I think when you got into Books Inc. Early on, Amazon and eBay were probably just still in its infancy stages, I'm guessing.
They were definitely on the periphery. So when I started at the Laurel Village store in 2001, the big thing back then, so the big book back then was the Da Vinci Code.
Okay, yeah.
But what bookstores were doing was all the like top bestsellers would always be like 30% off.
Mhm.
And that was a way to like move this stock and sort of try to compete. And then just over the years is when yeah, Amazon just became like just sort of slowly took over as people got more used to like using computers and doing online ordering, and well, like it wasn't when I first started, there wasn't so much in terms of customers being like, well, Amazon has this, why don't you guys have it? But eventually, I think about a few years in is when you start people having going like, I think actually more when I switched to so I went from Laurel Village to Alameda,
Okay.
and more when I went to Alameda is when it started really taking off, and then people in the book industry were really getting worried to compete with the price matching of Amazon. So that's when I started it. That's when I really had to sort of dive into the like because people would be like, I see this on Amazon for this
Right.
much. Like, why can't you price match it or do that? And
Right.
so I always had to sell the spiel that like the reason we can't match Amazon is that they're not trying to make a profit. They're just trying to kind of basically undercut us and stuff. And
Right.
so what we sell the book at is what the publishers wanted us to sell the book at. And I always have to point out, I'm like, that's printed on the book. So we don't come up with that price. The publisher has come up with that price. So what Amazon sells it at is what basically what the wholesalers buy it at. And then we that price that's made is for our our like skimpy profit
Hmm.
margins. So
Right.
so I've had to sort of do that over the years, though. Finally, now I think within the last 3 to 4 years, I don't get so much of that. People kind of doing that. Like obviously, that was like sort of the biggest bugaboo for a number of years. Is that people would come into the store or they'd call and you'd go and pull a book for them, and then then they'd be like, well, what's the price on the book? And I'm like, well, and I'd always go first off, I'm like, the price printed on the book, just to confer that we're not
Right.
making this price up, is X90, like X99, and that's what we have to sell it as. So I can't price match
Right.
that, because we would basically go. Yeah, I have to explain. If we went to price match Amazon, we go out of business like within
Right.
a matter of days.
Right. But
So
you're also
yeah.
selling the bestsellers as new, and they're on Amazon. They're probably getting it
Oh
used.
yes. Oh
Yeah.
yes. So the only it's just sort of part of it's a whole. I mean, it's interesting living in San Francisco this whole time during this whole thing, because it's sort of the change in not only the book selling industry but the tech industry as well, and sort of how it's affected not only the book industry but also just like life in general. Like when I got here, it was the end of the first dot-com boom, and
Hmm.
just to see the change, like not like the change in that, but like the change in rents and stuff like that too, and just how all of that's affected everything because of people, the habit of convenience of not having to leave your house and
Right.
just have things ordered to you, and not to mention just made cheaper. And sort of it's interesting when they I'm trying to think about I think it's the Uber thing where it was like, just go on and wreck stuff or whatever. I forgot the actual tagline, but sort of basically that's what tech has done in terms
Mm.
of all forms of everything, is that they've just come in and not really worried about the consequences be damned. They just went ahead and put out the product and stuff. So sort of like Pandora's box got open, and now we just
Right.
have to find ways to adapt. And
Right.
so my whole book selling career has been ways like, how do you adapt to certain things? And it's kind of hard in terms of with my bookstore, because it's like it's not just a mom and pop shop. It's actually like an independent chain, is that how they
Okay.
refer to it?
Mm. Yeah.
So change is harder to come by, because it all has to come from corporate headquarters, and they sort of have to make decisions on what to do. Where it's like, if you were more not having that kind of chain of command, you'd be able to make more adjustable changes, stuff
Yeah.
like that. So there's been that sort, and the change away from bestsellers kind of was another thing. Well, just sort of the over reliance on sort of what the New York Times bestseller was.
Mhm.
And the New York Times bestsellers don't reflect what people in this side of the country are reading, or
Sure. Sure.
it's just interesting how it's put
Yeah.
together. And then people realize that also too, a lot of stuff that made the bestseller list, like political books, that was stuff that, uh, certain people in the party would buy up a bunch of books to inflate the numbers and
Mhm.
therefore make the list and
Right.
sort of to grab people's attentions and interests and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So
There's definitely a game
yeah,
behind the business. There's definitely a game behind the
yes.
business for sure.
Um, and
But
then sort
also,
of yeah,
go ahead, Leo.
the change of over the trends of what people read. Like like so the pandemic changed a ton of stuff, obviously, but sort of the gradual change in terms of book readership. Like a lot of I'd say the majority of more than the majority of readers are women. Not
Okay.
like I'd say they do a lot more reading than men and stuff. And there, I'm not, and there's still plenty of men that go out there and read, but a lot of the trends have been driven by sort of female dominated
Hmm.
taste, especially in the last few years. And so, and then the other thing, which was interesting too, at the store I started was with Laurel Village, because it's a small little quaint store inside of like little shopping area,
Hmm.
like strip mall almost, but because it's deals with like higher end clientele, they spend tons of money. But early on, I was told that the kids stuff sells more than the adult stuff.
Right.
And so it's always interesting in terms of with the kid stuff. It's a lot of it, parents always are buying. Parents are the ones really trying to get their children to read for a lot of it. So yeah, they definitely are the driving force between a lot of it. But it was also interesting in my start there. Towards the end was the part of this was Harry Potter, but then the YA trend.
Hmm.
So when I started in Laurel Village all those years ago, YA was like a shelf and
Right.
eventually expanded to two shelves, and now it's this huge dominant force
Right.
of the industry.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because I do feel like right now the book industry is always trying to find too much of the next Harry Potter or Twilight. Um,
Copy what's successful.
yes, and so there's still a lot of that, but I feel like a lot of the trends in terms of that sort of like so much of the stuff we send back though is like a lot of YA stuff. But
Right.
you need a strong kids person to sell that stuff.
Yeah.
Without that, it's really hard to, I'm an adult. I don't want to like read that stuff. It's
Right.
not
But
meant for me.
you
Yeah,
know, also
yeah,
though, there are stores popping up all over the country now that are just
yeah,
specializing in kids and YA books,
yeah,
just specific stores, which I think that's a great foretell of the future. I think if we're getting more
yeah.
kids to read, it's just great for the future.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Though I saw sort of the drawback of sort of having the readership being predominantly YA in terms of like it was a Twitter thing I saw recently, which I get into more. But the other thing too I noticed was during the pandemic was it was sort of another genre that just like with YA, I think it's sort of the continuation of the growing of the white
Mhm.
people who grew up having YA books. And so when I started at Laurel Village, romance was, and even going back to the Thunderbird, romance was a couple shelves, and we used to joke it's just all the bodice ripper stuff.
Right.
And as like jokes, sometimes I'd pull out like a romance book and just read like one of the juicy tidbits in like a fancy voice just for like, just to humor the rest of the staff. And then it was kind of crazy because now I've worked at three different Booksinks locations and done some stuff at a couple other stores, but I'm back after all these years at the store I started at. But so um, over the pandemic, I found an email saying that we're going to get rid of romance and romance will just be put into fiction. And I was like, that did not age well because the next year was sort of the whole TikTok trend
Yeah.
of um, basically, I'm trying to think who really kicked off that whole thing of like, but the whole Colin Hoover,
Right,
Elizabeth Jenkins Reid's, and now it's huge,
right.
and that's basically, and I was like, and then you have the Sarah Mass stuff,
Mhm.
and I was like, how I had to ask a coworker,
Which is blowing
yeah.
up as we speak still. It's
Oh,
blowing up as we speak. Yeah.
it is huge, and I had to ask a coworker. I'm like, who's reading this? Because my tastes are like, my two favorite authors are Cormac McCarthy and John Steinbeck.
Right.
Partly because of John Steinbeck, partly because of where I grew up,
Yeah.
Monterey, Salinas. So,
Hmm.
but I like really dark, dark fucked up stuff, and I was just like, who's reading all this like happy-go-lucky romance stuff? And I found out it's all it's from TikTok. And I
Right.
was like, it was just something that's completely off my radar because I'm older and
Hmm.
I'm not I don't, and so TikTok right now has dominated it's like dominating the book
Right.
industry in terms of what's blowing up in terms of trendsetters and stuff like that. So romance went from being put into fiction and now it has its own whole bay, and it's almost, it almost competes with the amount of like mystery and sci-fi
Right.
and stuff like that.
And in my
So
marketplace, when you get those books that are signed by the author,
yeah,
even the young adults who are reading these,
yeah,
they're now collecting them like they're modern first editions, like it's a
yeah.
marketplace, and
Mhm.
they're paying one, two, $300 for a signed copy of these books.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, it's all positive though,
Mhm.
because it's getting people to read. The coffee has arrived.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's Lori.
It's
She's a
get,
musician too.
it's
Yeah.
getting people to read. It's also getting them into collecting. And
Mhm.
when young people in the collecting, it's getting them to care for the book.
Yes. Well, that's always kind of been it's sort of interesting because I myself, I read what I like, and then
Mhm.
I want to keep it or pass it along to somebody else. And so I have signed copies of stuff and stuff I'll probably like never read. So, and a lot of it's like signed musicians, but like I got to meet Andy Summers. He did a book signing at Alameda. I have a
I
Bruce.
saw him in 1983 at the
Yeah.
Army Bowl.
I have a signed I think my most prized one is my signed Amy Sedaris, I Like
Okay.
You.
Mhm.
And I have a signed Bruce Campbell. And now book companies are going big on having signed first editions. So I have a few of those, but it's just kind of ended like, yeah, I took like the Dave Grohl one, Thurston Moore.
Yeah.
And so now
There's
I
so
usually
many.
hook
Yeah.
people up
There's
with those because I know those will definitely be worth money at some point down the
well,
road.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
it's
there's so many
yeah.
biographies being published now, celebrity and musician. But I think what publishers are doing now is if they're publishing 50,000 copies of a musician's biography,
Yeah.
they're getting 10,000 signed before publication,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
because those are finding their way into my market very easily.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, those are just it's just like usually with like somebody like that now you can expect to have signed first editions.
yeah,
So like I've given two people the Kathleen Hanna one as gifts.
right.
So and yeah, I it's just sort of that's one of the one things too. It's just always sort of for me, I've never quite understood the huge drive to read memoirs. Especially, but that's always been sort of a driving factor is just, people's, obviously you have your famous people memoirs and people buy that. And then, but I don't know if they really read them. Like
Well,
at
yeah,
least with
yeah,
musician ones, they
right.
do. But the last music one I really read, was because I did a book signing for it, and that was Lita Ford.
Okay,
And that was actually extremely entertaining. I've tried to get more people to read it because she hooked up with like
right.
the best of guitar players from like Tony Iommi, Glenn
Yeah.
Tipton, Van Halen, and Richie Blackmore,
Well,
and
I
her
got one
stuff with
for
the
you right here.
Runaways. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
got one for. I'm going to reach over
yeah.
here. So hold on.
Mhm.
We're going to get into this one. So here's one for you.
Oh, well, yeah.
And what the publishers are doing now is they're putting
Oh, yeah.
signed first edition on
Yeah.
them. And the what I see though is they're overprinting though.
Yeah.
They're overprinting because I have about 50 copies of this of a signed first edition of this book.
Yeah. No,
And
and it's sort of that's the problem though. It's like they're not they'll be worth something, but they're not like, it's not like I actually got lucky because Bob Odenkirk was in my store a
mhm,
couple of years ago, and so he actually did sign that, and it wasn't one of those things
right.
where it's just like, because I don't think I seriously doubt he's going into a warehouse and signing like 10,000 of these.
No, no,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it all depends on, I think, on how many they're publishing. But when the publisher starts putting these kinds of stickers on the book
yeah,
from the get-go, and,
yeah,
and I see this a lot. I see this a lot with the current biographies. Is the book market is changing because maybe somebody will read it, but now they're really buying it to collect it for that
yeah,
name.
yeah. It winds up
So the
become
market's changing.
Yeah, well, it winds up becoming that whole like the toy left in the box because it's a collectible, not something that you play with.
Well,
And so because if you normally read any kind of book, like almost any book I read, it's worn. Like it doesn't
right,
retain its shape. The corners get all dog-eared. Not that I dog-ear books, but they just get
right,
worn and beat up. Like I've read Alan Moore's Jerusalem, and that book like is like barely maintaining its shape, and that's
yeah,
like over 1,000 pages. So yeah, I feel like right now people aren't really reading them. They're just more collector's items, which is kind of it's interesting in terms of that sort of market, that it's not really so much that people are buying them to read them. They're just
right,
more collectible items and stuff like that. So, and I almost kind of wish there was more of a differentiation between that and between when the author actually came in and personally signed the books.
right.
So, and we still actually have that now. Like, I did a couple weeks ago, I did a big event with a big romance author, Jessica Joyce, and so she definitely did a big signing. But she also personalized books
Right.
too, and that to me is more. That should even be even more. But it's one of those that like who knows what the market's going to look like in 30 and 40 years after sort of this, in terms of like the reading trends, like
Right.
is how long is romance going to be popular, like you could sort of like the whole, yeah, you go from like Harry Potter to YA to now like these like romance and now fantasy romance and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
so it's always interesting to see will what trends will survive and keep up, and what sort of will sort of might at some point peter out. So
I
yeah.
just wonder, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Mhm.
Baseball cards are now being graded and slabbed in plastic, so
Yeah.
you have it now sealed. They
Yeah.
do that now with comic books. So now when you
Yeah.
get a comic book graded, now it gets sealed up in plastic.
Yeah.
Even if it's a rare copy, even if it's a collectible copy, you'll never be able to turn those pages anymore.
Yeah.
It's now just a found collector's item.
Yeah.
Is that where you think we're headed with books?
I think so.
It, yeah.
I feel like it's that Simpsons episode. Well, because the comic book thing was always crazy to me because my dad, he had all like those first Marvel stuff. He had the
Mhm.
first X-Men, first Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Hulk, all that kind of stuff. They had no idea what was going to happen. So of course, guess what? Grandma like threw out dad's comic books, except for a small handful. But even then, those comic books, they're worth something. But because they're kind of worn, because the point was to read it. It doesn't have the same market. But now I feel it's like the Simpsons Radioactive Man episode, where like you have this like really high end thing that's sealed, and then like when you go to touch it you have to use like tweezers to like peruse
Right.
it and stuff and get the story, but people really aren't buying it for its original intention of reading this and getting something out of the story, or so it's now, yeah, they're just becoming kind of collector's items and stuff like
Right.
that. So which is fine. I mean, like every industry kind of has that, like in like music, like you have guys that just collect, old vintage guitars and pedals, and they don't like, it's like Spinal Tap. It's like, here you can look, but like don't
Right.
touch it, don't even look at it,
Yeah.
kind of thing, because
Yeah.
it'll lose
I just
value as soon as
wonder.
eyes are
Yeah.
set on it.
Like,
So
if you had a signed Steinbeck, if you had a
yeah.
signed Steinbeck of Mice and Men or The Moon is
Mhm.
Down, or any one of his titles,
Yeah.
are we getting to the point where those are going to now get sealed in a plastic
Oh,
slab,
yeah.
and we're not going to enjoy the fruit of the book?
I mean, in terms of, well, it's just sort of, I mean, those old editions will be worth tons of money, but like,
Right.
I have found out recently that advanced readers copies, ARCs,
Yes.
those are worth a lot of money, and nobody collected those for years. We still continue to put a bunch of ARCs in the recycling bin and stuff. But now I found out that, like, if you have ARCs of this, hold on to it. And so I sort of have become addicted to this one fantasy series by Marlon James, Black Leopard, Red Wolf. And I don't know if I still have my ARC of
Right.
Black Leopard, Red Wolf, but I have an ARC of Moonwitch,
Right.
Spider King, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, that'll definitely be worth something. But I never had an idea that those were going to be worth something, because the whole thing actually was said not for resale value,
Right.
and now they're huge collector's
Right.
items. So my friend told me, I saw him because I worked with him in Alameda as a bookseller for years, and then he's working at a used like vintage shop where they sell like books and clothes and all that kind of stuff. So he told me, he's like, that stuff's going worth a lot of money on eBay now. And I was like, shit, if I had known all those years, I would have fucking kept
Yeah.
those bestsellers that I
Well, yeah,
thought were just
that's
garbage.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot of my
So
marketplace. Not
yeah.
and just for people who may not be familiar with the term ARC, it's advanced reader's copy,
Mhm.
but not only ARCs, but also the uncorrected proof copies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
Well, it's
these are the copies that either go back to the writer for last minute editing, or
yeah.
go to the newspapers a year ahead of time for possible review.
Oh yeah. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So
so,
it's
and
mostly, well,
sometimes
it's,
they
yeah,
have
it's
sometimes they have
yeah.
photos in them of the author.
Well, it's, yeah, it's mostly for reviews, for like book reviews, and
Yeah.
for booksellers, so that way people sort of when it comes out, people can easily promote the book and stuff like that. But
Right.
it's always I always I didn't really bother with them because it said like uncorrected, so I'm like, I don't I don't want to read something and know that I wound up being changed later.
Right.
But the funny thing, I think, with the ones I was just mentioning, because they're fantasy series, you know, there was no fantasy map, so I was like, I can't really dive into this because I don't have the map to refer to,
Yeah.
and so I wouldn't read it before until it actually came out, because I was like, I kind of want to see in the map where everything is and stuff like that. But it's always just it's just interesting that it's become a market, because yeah, technically it was just supposed to be recycling waste once you were
Mhm.
done with it. Because,
So I
well,
can
that's the
tell
thing
you,
too. I
yeah,
think if you were the author, if it wasn't finished or you wound up changing it, then like
yeah,
it's like it's like showing somebody your music, and then you're like, I changed a part, and
right.
then this is what came out. So
Which is
yeah,
exactly why it makes it collectible. It's an early edition before the
yeah,
public edition.
yeah. I think somebody wants to.
And now we got to
Yeah,
interview the cat.
yeah. No, she
So
actually she likes to chew up the corners of my book sometimes to get my attention, to feed her at 3 in the morning. So
so
yeah.
do you see a lot of people at Books Inc. asking for collector copies like uncorrected proofs and ARCs, or
Not
is this something you've stumbled upon?
it's only something I've known recently, because I still think I think it's just more one of those collector things right now,
Right.
whereas later more people will be attuned to it, but you still have every once in a while people asking for first editions.
Right.
But I think a large majority of the in-store shopping public, they're not really, some people are book people, they'll ask for first editions, but they don't really, I'd say that's like once every few weeks, maybe once a month,
Right.
even if that, like it's mostly, I've been the receiver for a number of years, and I always kind of get on the publisher's case for like not doing a better job of packaging books,
Hmm.
because I'm like people see these, they buy them as gifts, or they, like you said, you buy them as collectors, and
Right.
so like when you fucking like haven't like properly packed the uh the books in the box, and I wind up with like a bunch of ripped dust jackets, it's like you've sort of, yeah, you fucked up my resale
Yeah.
value already right there. So
It's going back. It's going back.
well, I call out stuff damage all the time. Sometimes, dark secret for, oh,
Mhm.
I'm just going to call that damage, because the dark secret is that they tell you to donate or destroy
Right.
it. So I'm like, okay, well, it's going to my personal donation. Um, but just sort of a lot of stuff though, I wound up donating to. We have a whole like kids a bag for collection for kids books, and then damaged copies I send out to friends and acquaintances,
Hmm.
and then I love the whole little library thing.
Yeah.
I don't, sadly there's not enough of them with me for in walking distance, but every once in a while I'll try to find a way to like dump off books that I'm no longer reading and stuff like that. And then yeah, it's just sort of it's interesting in terms of that little library stuff now, because my coffee shop sort of has one, and then the music venue Eli's that I played at recently, they have a little library thing and stuff like that. So I like that you can find these like little treasures and stuff,
Yeah.
books. But yeah, it's just interesting in terms of like people sort of like caring about it, because a lot of times the publishers don't care, and they just expect you to sort of that you're just putting a bunch of stuff in the recycling bin. I remember when strips came up, that you'd strip off the cover and then the rest of it goes in the recycling bin.
Yeah.
And I remember very early in my book selling career, I was like that, like I left like a bag of strip books out, and the my manager was like, no, we're supposed to dump those, that's what the publisher wants. And I was like, that's kind of screwed up. I was like, not only did a tree die for this, but then like, this could actually be used for something. And the one thing I've wanted to do more that you can't, it's really hard to do, is donate to prisons
Right.
and jails, because
Yeah. You have to
they
get you have to get approval for that. Yeah.
approval and all that kind of stuff, because you can't, it's just I mean, criminals have very high ends of sneaking in things, and so the fear is, you donate a bunch of books and somehow somebody like slipped drugs in there or something like that.
Yeah.
So but I would honestly, I just wish there was better ways to facilitate that, or organizations that would
Yeah.
provide that kind of stuff.
There is,
Yeah,
and we'll talk. You and I will talk in a day or two, and I'll give
yeah.
you some information on that to help you with
Mhm.
that cause.
Yeah,
Because in Florida, I have the connections for that, but I'll try to
yeah.
get it for you for where
Oh,
you are.
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I just saw a thing in Florida about so starting to become a library. There's a lot of crossover in terms of what libraries and
Mhm.
booksellers do. It's just libraries put into quantifiable scholar terms. And but there was an issue that I dealt with in one of my classes, was like, you have to make room for new stuff, which means you have to get rid of stuff that people aren't checking out. So one of the things we sort of scenarios I did was like somebody had dumped a bunch of books, and it caught the like local news media attention, and people are like, "Why are you dumping all these books?"
I got
And
tagged on
they
that.
have to get their
I got
stuff.
tagged on that 100 times.
Yeah. So yeah, I somebody sent me something that
Yeah.
just happened in Florida where
Yeah.
that happened like that, and it was just like I had uh, this person who's actually she has like a dog account that like reviews books, and she sent me that thing, and I was just like, oh, I actually just read about the scenario that like technically they do that, but they're not supposed to do them in big dumps to draw a big attention to it. But it's kind of one of those things where it's like uh, they they do have ways of trying to get stuff like that, but sometimes they just have to get rid of stuff to make stuff
Yeah,
for the new stuff that comes
right.
in. So
What they should have done
yeah,
is just ran a public book sale, and all the books could have been on the shelf and the public could have come in.
yeah,
Because that happens all the time with smaller colleges that go out of business. They just
yeah,
they sell the books outright and
yeah.
do that. But yeah, that was one of those unfortunate mysteries
It
we'll
was
know
too,
about.
but it did tie in politically because a lot of it, from what I understand, was a lot of like gender study stuff,
Yeah,
and because of the whole, conservative scare about
right.
like, oh my God, they're trying to convert all these kids to becoming trans and stuff like that. A lot of stuff just got like
Yeah,
thrown in there, and it's kind of it's sort of one of those things. As a librarian, I know there's more dealing with that, but especially during the Trump years, you'd get like people coming in like, "Oh, where's the Trump books? Where's the Trump books?" Like we sell them, we just don't have a lot of them
right.
because we don't really cater to. There's not that buying public. Like, yeah, you'll find a bunch of those in the middle, rural areas, but we're a business. Your whole thing's about business, and so you have to sell things that people are going to buy. And so you'd have like, yeah, I just yeah, a few times just having to like deal with unruly customers just being pissed off because you didn't have like,
Right.
the Ron DeSantis book or like something like that. And it's like it's not that we're not, and we do carry that
Yeah,
stuff.
but
It's
look
just
how
we
we
don't
keep
have like
talking
a
about look how
stack
we
of them.
keep
Yeah,
talking about biography. We keep going
yeah,
back to biography.
yeah,
It's such an interesting thing because along with social media, which is sort of the video biography of our lives,
yeah.
people definitely want to delve into the biography of other people. So I
Well,
think is that a
yeah,
trend? Is that a trend for you in your business?
it's just sort of always been there, and it's
Right.
sort of I've always just wondered why the publisher sometimes goes heavy because like I'm the receiver, and so I'm the first one that opens the box and sees all the books, and I read the backs of a lot of them, and I'm just like, man, I guess everybody has a fucking interesting life story to tell. But the thing for me also early on when I was doing book selling was James Fry, Million Little Pieces,
Hmm.
and people finally learned kind of like the sort of dark secret that
Right.
like authors kind of embell embellish certain things that weren't that
Fictional,
didn't really
fiction,
happen. So
fictionalized and nonfiction.
yeah, and sort of it was just kind of funny the fallout with that and stuff too. Like, and that's another thing too is celebrity book clubs still like they still drive stuff. Like
Hmm.
there's still Oprah doesn't have the same power it once did,
Right.
but the Reese Witherspoon was really big or still is really big. And oh, celebrity cook, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
funny what celebrities get their hands into with book industry from like kids books to like cooking books or like lifestyle books and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So the book industry definitely is always kind of like, oh, how can we like get a celebrity to get do something and that way we make money off of it. Like
Mhm.
when I went to work at the Chestnut store, I was really annoyed because we kept selling Gwyneth Paltrow's cookbook, and I can't stand Gwyneth Paltrow. And I remember my coworker pointing out to me, he was all, check this out, and it was like her favorite recipe in the entire book was for avocado toast. I was
Okay.
like, so people are spending $35 on the celebrity cookbook for her to say, "Oh, this is my favorite thing out of the cookbook is avocado toast." So,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
let me ask you this because we're at the tail end of 2024.
yeah,
And a lot of the people who watch this video, their
mm,
booksellers use the new. Um,
yeah.
what would you say are the top three subjects or categories you're selling now at the tail of all of 2024?
Oh, that's so right now would be romance in both this sort of like new agey kind of romance of like millennial sort of Gen Z romance where like, oh, guy is so perfect but he has some flaws, but will it work? And then the fantasy romance because
Okay.
the like so you have Sarah Mass, which is huge, and you have this other series where it's like fantasy romance with dragons.
Right.
That is huge. So those easily are like the top things. And then you still have a lot. I think the industry still underrates the serious fiction reader,
Okay.
because I still feel like when it comes time when we do our restock orders, just like I mean, to me, I love. I mean, nonfiction is huge, obviously, and I will read at least one nonfiction book a year. But for me, still, like serious fiction, you need that emotional sort of
Right.
journey to give you kind of like as a reflection on life. So that's usually what I mostly kind of read, is sort of that, but usually darker, little darker fantasy. But I'd
Right.
honestly just say it's still serious kind of fiction. But a lot of people still love their thrillers, and sort of there's a little bit sort of the romance is just dominating so much stuff right now, and I think it's a lot of it. It's just people who were young YA readers have gravitated to this sort of thing, and a lot of it's pushed by stuff like what people promote on TikTok and stuff like
Right.
that. But
I also think
yeah.
though that when the Nobel Prize in Literature is announced every year, there's always a run of that author.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the
It
Pulitzer.
always
Yeah,
is. Well,
yeah,
you have your the Booker Prize. I've read a
right.
lot more Booker prizes than I have
Yeah,
Nobel
and the
prizes.
Pulitzer, of course, and
The Pulitzer
the
too.
National Book Award.
Yeah, National Book Award, not so much. And then Barack Obama's reading list just came
Right.
out, and I'm sure people are going to start asking about that.
Well,
But
they may call
yeah,
you up and say, "Do you have every book on Obama's reading list?" They're going to want to buy every
I'm
book.
surprised I haven't gotten that call yet, because yeah, but I'd still say yeah, those are the big trends until like Dune. The Dune movies came out, and we've sold a ton of Dune since then.
Yeah.
More ever so than it was always there as a classic, like Lord of the Rings. We still sell Lord of the
Right.
Rings, still sell the shit out of Harry Potter
Right.
and that kind of stuff. But
Anytime we have
yeah,
Netflix or a movie attached to something, we know it's going to sell. It's going to.
well, hopefully it should sell. I
Yeah.
feel like my book company hasn't done enough to sort of be like, hey, read the book before you watch it,
Yeah.
because so much stuff. Now a lot of intellectual property is started out in books, and now somebody adapts it, but you kind of yeah, you just sort of I feel like we don't do enough to try to draw in those readers. So
Right.
because there's always
Before they see the film. Sure.
yeah, and you always have people that just be like, oh, I just rather just watch, spend the um 2 hours to watch a film. But actually, the one thing I do love about prestige television, at least I people found a way that you can tell the story a lot better
Right.
spread out over a bunch of episodes, like Game of Thrones. Like
Yeah.
I got hugely hooked in that. I watched the first season and I read all the books, and then but it was cool that, like, oh, you can do a lot more with this longer form of storytelling, instead of every episode just be completely different and stuff like that. So I feel like that was one positive trend, because it's hard to translate a book into a few hours.
Right.
And it was actually interesting because I read one book a couple of years ago called A Saint in Tango, and it was turned into it's a Hungarian book, and then it was made into a movie, and the movie is 7 hours long, and it's really kind of like it's black and white, kind of sort of a weird like David Lynch and Hungry kind of feel, but and really like kind of dark and twisted. But it was kind of cool to like read the book and then watch
Right.
the movie that was an actual full on representation, and you weren't going like, oh, well, why did they have this scene or this thing? I thought this part was pivotal in the book and didn't make its way into the movie and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of see that sort of that change a little bit in terms of the two. And like the one series I've been reading, the Black Leopard Red Wolf, like some of the passages just feel really cinematic, like you can
Right.
see the choreographed fight scenes kind of in there. um and like in my head, I'm just like, oh man, how cool is that going to look on the big screen if they adapt this thing? So,
If you can already
yeah,
see it, you know what's coming. If you can
yeah.
already see it.
But then it's kind of funny though too, because now I think they're trying to, because they're doing "This Is Us," the Colleen Hoover, and
Mhm.
I've heard, so, it has a choose market, but then
Right.
I read on Twitter where people are just like trashing the writing style, which is well deserved because you read some of this stuff and you're like, oh, this writing is just bad, but it just fits a template that people like.
Well, it's not Steinbeck.
Yeah,
It's not Steinbeck.
yeah, no. And so it'll be interesting to see out of that whole thing, like, what gets made into like movies and stuff like that. And if that like it'll be interesting to see what, yeah, the YA to romance, what
Sure.
those readers will be reading in like 15, 20 years. Because yeah, that's the one thing I've noticed, at least in both music and books, is my taste changed over time. And what I really liked when I was younger sort of like still has that value in some sense, but then you look back on it and see sort of, certain flaws or stuff that just hasn't aged well, kind of
Mm.
thing. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how um how people's tastes will evolve over time, and stuff, and just sort of, and yeah, how like I only learned this like earlier this year, Gen Alpha, because we ran out of letters.
Mhm.
So, and how their reading taste will change about stuff and how they'll view things, because it's interesting too, because with sort of the Me Too movement, and then like, people's, you know cancel culture is kind of like, it's one of those things like, I don't really like so much the way it's called cancel culture. It's more of a real valuation to me
Mhm.
of like, hey, this person did this art, but this person was also a giant piece of shit.
Right.
And so how do we evaluate their works that still have legit standing? Like, I read H.P. Lovecraft like around Halloween, and that guy was a fucking giant fucking piece of shit, but still his works still have legit, you can still get legit value and
Yep.
inspiration out of it. So
And
it'll be interesting in terms
highly
of how that
collectible. Yep. Highly collectible.
will affect like certain authors when it comes out. Like I somebody had just passed away. It was Alice Munro,
Mhm.
and she was known as like a great writer, and then like family members said like she was terrible. I think it had something to do with like molestation, and it was just like, well, what does that change now in terms of how people view that author and their works? How will their work stand up to this evaluation, in terms of like, good art, terrible people
Right.
sort of thing? So and I don't really see it so much as, yeah, to me that's what it is. It's not really cancel culture, because we don't really cancel people
Right.
for that. We just realize like, hey, this person's kind of a giant piece of shit.
Right.
Maybe it's not good to have our morals associated with somebody who does these
But
kind
in,
of things despite their artwork. So
yeah, but in
yeah,
today's society, we definitely take a scalpel to people's past lives and
yeah.
certainly try to understand who they are. Sometimes I feel like we need to let the work stand on itself, whether they're a visual artist or a writer.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just sort of, I don't, it's hard because, for me, like I've had definitely like my influences and stuff like that. And then, you realize like, they did certain things, and you're like, yeah, that I don't approve of that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that artwork still had an effect on me. And so I like, it affected me in some way, and there's still legit value in that. And I think that's up to the individual in terms of what they want to do about that. But it was kind of, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things. I remember like with the Game of Thrones thing, people were like, oh, well, there's so much like rape and stuff like that. And it's like, well, if you went back into history, like, women have always been treated. That's always been sort of throughout human history, and you can't
History
say
of
that like
mankind.
it's
Sure.
not like, act like it didn't exist or pretend like it didn't exist, because it was used as like, power back then, and throughout actually most of human history till recently now. So and yeah, it's just sort of um interesting in terms of that conversation of what people like, because people are just like, oh, we can't like read this, and it's like, no, there's legit value, but it should just have a disclaimer of like, hey, this person did some unsavory things, so it's up to you if you decide if you want to sort of dive into it. One of the things with library is archivism, and I feel like, yeah, it's definitely a part of like, a history, and we got to preserve something, whether we heavily promote it or not. That's one thing, but it's, it existed, and we have to acknowledge that existence and the context of everything.
You know, we,
So
we, we, we
I
don't
think
want our
context is
world to,
key.
we don't want our world to
Yeah.
become Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. That's for sure.
No, absolutely not. And I always, yeah, even like it's like, yeah, that's problematic, but it's still, people are going to find their way to it.
Yeah.
So, and it's always kind of been interesting in terms, I remember with Books Inc. A lot of times we always, or like bookstores will always just have a copy of Mein Kampf just to show that they're all about free speech. And I always kind of laughed at the idea. I was like, why is it Mein Kampf and not like the Turner Diaries or something like
Right.
even worse?
Yeah.
But
Well, you can't sell,
yeah,
you can't, you really, it's getting harder and harder to sell books like that. Uh,
yeah,
eBay and Amazon both have their own restrictions on these.
yeah.
So there's a little bit of book banning still going on.
Mhm.
We don't want to erase history. We do want to learn from it, is how I feel.
I absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how you can't. Yeah, I mean, the whole history is decided by the victors, but
Yeah.
the evidence is always there, and it's like with a lot of things now, stuff thought was wiped out. Now they're finding
Right.
like, hey, man, like with indigenous cultures, it's like these cultures have rich history.
Hmm.
It's just the victors kind of try to
Yeah.
wipe it out, but
Right.
it still existed, and that's
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
things are the way they
Yeah.
are. And I
When
think
you
history, you
mentioned the
need,
Turner
yeah.
Diaries, I also think of the Anarchist Cookbook.
Oh,
That's
absolutely,
a
yeah,
highly collectible book, but it's getting
yeah,
harder and harder to sell it through the corporate platforms that exist in our society. But
yeah,
it's very interesting. So
yeah. No,
I got two more questions for you, because
okay,
I
yeah.
can go on for 4 hours. I have a feeling we're going to go to lunch.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I
Uh,
can easily, yeah, easily
what
keep going. Yeah,
you're in a band now,
yeah. I'm in
and
two bands,
yeah,
so
okay.
yeah.
Give them a shout out, and then tell me
Okay.
where you guys going to be playing in the next couple months.
I don't have any book shows right now.
Okay.
Right now, so I have one band I've been doing for over 10 years, and it's kind of a mutation of my band going back all the way in college. That band was called Hot Black Desiato,
Okay.
and both me and the drummer were in that band, uh, and we've always kind of done this like sort of definitely metal rock,
Hmm.
and it just sort of evolved with our changes in terms of that. But we always kind of do something different. It's interesting. I feel like 90s was very explorative, and people always tried different things. Some of it didn't always work, like rap rock and stuff like that. And except now, I guess that's kind of being reevaluated. But that Hot Black Seattle went to Orbit Confusion, and then now it's Hazard's Cure, which is basically, so Hazard's Cure. We got that name from a woman called Linda Hazard. There's a book called Starvation Heights
Hmm.
that explains her whole thing, and she was sort of kind of like they do it now. It's like fasting. Her
Yeah.
thing was all about fasting, except she fasted her patients to death, and so that's the Hazard's Cure. But we do sort of like blackened death, doom, stoner metal, and we jokingly call it speed doom. And we been working on a concept album basically around her entire story. So that'll basically, we're just working on trying to release that, our concept album based on Linda Hazard, based on our name Hazard's Cure. And
Gotcha.
then my other band, my bandmate in Hot Black Seattle, he was in a band called Bader Vogu, which I joined back in the 2010s. And so that was more Oakland based, like sludge doom. And after our last tour in 2018, it ended. And so I basically kind of wanted to do something similar, but kind of add to it. And so that band I have now is called Penury, and penury is an actual English word. It's not a made up word like Waterloo, but penury just means extremely broke.
Okay.
And so we just did our last show at Eli's with Weekend Nachos, but that band, we're actually hopefully working together to put together an album and stuff. But we both have pages on Instagram, Penury and Hazards Cure. So and that's where we do most of our promotion for that kind of stuff outside of still doing like
Right.
putting out flyers and stuff like that. So
And if
and
people
then I
want
actually have I have a Twitter X account, and somehow Penry blew up on the X.
to,
So
okay,
I will post more on that, but I also have a Threads and a Blue Sky
okay.
account. So I just got to sort of use those more to
So people can
like,
find
hey,
you.
we have a show coming up,
Yeah.
but it's
That's
just interesting. Instagram's still more the way that people just sort of find bands and shows and stuff like
right.
that outside of it being advertised through the venue and stuff like that.
All
So
right. Well,
but yeah,
I,
and I do a lot of the stuff I wrote write is influenced by books, well, like Cormac McCarthy kind of stuff. So very dark and heavy and yeah,
well, just to stay
very
in the
bloody.
in the stream of
Yeah.
books and music, the name of the show, the interview we're doing is
Mhm.
Destination Unknown,
Yeah.
which comes from a missing person song coming back to California for you.
Oh,
Uh,
excellent.
yeah, and so at the end of every interview, the last question I ask is where, because I don't know where you're sending me, tell me where
Yeah.
you're sending me next.
So I'm going to send you to my old manager, Nick Petrolakis. I worked with, it was interesting with Books Inc. because I interviewed with Calvin and then I
Okay.
interviewed with Nick at the Chestnut store when he was
Mhm.
manager there, which I wound up being at years later. And then back with Calvin hired me. But I worked with Nick in Alameda from 2006 to 2013. He is now living in Massachusetts, working at a bookstore.
Okay,
He has
excellent.
his own Instagram account, Drinks with Nicks,
Okay.
and so he reads and comes up with cocktail recipes based
Okay.
on the books he reads.
Well,
And so,
I'm from Massachusetts, so you're gonna
yeah,
send me back. You're gonna send me back home.
yeah, and so, but he is originally from Modesto, big
Okay.
Giants fan, and yeah, he's also a writer too. He,
And from Modesto, California.
yeah,
One of
but
my
he's
favorite
or
bands is
no,
from there.
yeah, uh,
You know the band Granddaddy?
yes,
Yeah, one of my favorite
yeah,
bands. Yeah,
excellent.
interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, he's yeah, he can give you a lot because he even has more years than me in terms of doing it going
Mhm.
back. So
Excellent.
just being a writer and everything like that. So but yeah, Mike Monson knows him. So
Well,
but yeah, he's the one to get in touch with for or yeah, I'll send you
yeah, just
his information.
give him a heads up that I'm going to
Oh,
contact
I did.
you.
He said he was down to do it, and he said to let him know when this
Beautiful.
episode airs.
And
So,
thank you so much, Leo, for I know it's early for you. Thank you for getting up
oh, it's all right.
doing
Yeah,
this interview with me. It's been phenomenal, and I thank you. And I look forward to reaching out to you in the future.
excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye, bye,
All
Leo.
right. Take care.